Hey everybody, what's up? Joe Norell here, making my daily video about circumcision. And so I got a request from Bob2 asking me to make a comparison of male circumcision versus female genital mutilation, because sometimes people will make the argument, well, circumcision isn't as bad as female genital mutilation, therefore it's okay, it's not the same thing at all, and it's totally different, versus, some activists will make that argument that they're the same and comparable. So they are definitely, it's a huge topic. I'll try to go into it as much as I can without being an absolute specialist. And start out with, people say, well, often female genital mutilation is done just to repress women's sexuality, while male circumcision is done for the benefit of the boy, for his sexual health. So, in regards to the history of why circumcision has been done in the United States, the main place, pretty much the only place now that does it for other than religious reasons, is that it was originally actually done to prevent masturbation, right? We know this from Adam Ruins Everything and his video about the real reason you're circumcised. Masturbation prevention was actually the main motivation behind it. And so it was sexual repression. That's why we started circumcising in the United States. It was later people tried to justify it with medical reasons and cover up its history, because it's not a very happy thing that it was actually done to damage men's sexuality, to make them less sexually aggressive, to make them not as sensitive, to make them less obsessed with sex. And so actually, at least in the West, circumcision has, for most of our history, been overtly done to damage our sexuality. Female genital mutilation, of course, is sometimes done to damage women's sexuality and to decrease that drive. It's also actually largely done for cultural reasons. I think if you ask most women why they do it, they say, well, it's how we've always done it, it's our tradition. She needs to look like her mother. It's cleaner, and all the exact same reasons. Think of any reason why we traditionally give for male circumcision. Those are the reasons that they give you, for religious reasons, for cultural reasons. It's also, they say, medical reasons as well. In the same way that we justify that with medical reasons, they justify it with medical reasons. They say it decreases urinary tract infections. It helps with other aspects of female health because it just makes it cleaner. And actually it does reduce there's a study that showed it reduced the transmission of HIV somewhat. So, when comparing the history and the reasons that we've given for doing it, if you look at the actual reasons that the cultures themselves give, if you ask in the United States, why do they cut females' genitals, we'll give you what reasons we think, and vice versa. If you go to their culture and ask, why do Americans circumcise? Of course, any other culture besides us knows it's cultural, knows it's because of superstition, it's because of the lies that we've been told, because we don't understand what we're missing. And so it's really hard to really compare these without looking at cultural relativism and realizing that actually we pretty much give all of the exact same reasons for doing them. So you have to actually look a little bit more at the procedure itself and the actual effects of it to really get more into it. As I said, the medical effects, there really aren't any good medical justifications for circumcision. That argument is pretty absurd. If any other country in the world looks at it and says, well, should we be circumcising our babies? It's like, it's not even a question. It's ridiculous. There's practically no medical benefits. As we'll get into, it does affect a man's sexuality. So, and of course, there aren't really a lot of benefits to to any genital cutting. It's there for a reason. It evolved to be there over billions of years, and it's not there for no reason. It's not there just to hurt you. So in terms of the medical side of it, there's really no difference. They justify it with medical reasons in female genital cutting cultures, and they justify it with medical reasons in male genital cutting cultures, but it's if you actually look at these arguments, they're pretty absurd. There's no good evidence that it really has much benefit for either. And another thing is it does make it cleaner whether you're circumcising a man or a woman. It makes it cleaner to cut away a woman's labia or a man's foreskin, because then they don't have to worry about washing it. It takes only a few seconds to wash either. But the thing is, actually a woman has about 4 times as much smegma buildup as men. So for cutting genitals for hygienic reasons, we should really be cutting females' genitalia. So I don't really like that argument very much. I don't think hygiene, you can just wash it every day and then that clears up that problem. So that reason's given for both. Physical, sexual is the next sort of question here. Hold on, I'll make one more note to myself. I'm trying to cover all of this. So in terms of the physical and sexual effects, you may say, well, okay, but female genital mutilation causes actual huge damage, whereas male circumcision doesn't do anything. And that doesn't really hold much weight if you start to look into it. Because if you look at female genital cutting cultures, they actually say it's great for their sex. They say it improves their sexuality. They're happily circumcised. They circumcise their daughters. It's good for sex. It makes sex better. The same things that circumcised men will tell you. It's sort of a psychological defense mechanism to, the opposite, that it may have a negative effect, or they'll at least say, well, it's neutral. It doesn't do anything. And here we need to make a distinction, because there's at least 3 types of female genital cutting. There's type 1, which is, as I understand, a ritual nick, sort of. I believe type 2 is removal of the clitoris or part of the clitoris or clitoral hood. And type 3 is infibulation, where all the labia are removed as well as the clitoris, and it's sewed shut afterwards. So type 3, which is the most severe, is also very rare. It's, I believe, less than 1%, if I'm not mistaken. And type 2 is what we generally think of, the removal of the clitoris, and what I'm going to refer to mainly in this section, because that's the most common form by far. And so with the male, when you remove the foreskin, you are removing about 15 square inches of skin. That's about the amount of this amount of skin. If you have an average size penis, for some people like myself, it's a lot more. But for an average size penis, it's about that, or about the amount of skin on your hand. Is how much is removed. It's a lot of skin. It's actually much, much more than is removed in other types of, or other, at least, type 2 female genital cutting. And so, in terms of tissue, actually male genital cutting removes a lot more tissue. So then the question is, well, what's the value of that tissue? Does it have any use? I mean, surely the clitoris has a lot of nerve endings in it, so it's okay to cut away the foreskin since it has no nerve endings, right? Well, actually, most of the nerve endings are in the foreskin. I mean, it's just a fact. It's very easy to test that. And for a lot of intact males who are adults, they will tell you that they get most of their pleasure from that. There are men who are circumcised as adults who can tell you, I don't feel anything anymore. Basically, all of my sensitivity is gone. I went from 100% to like 30%. And it's like night and day. I'm missing most of my sensitivity. So actually, you are removing a lot of nerve endings, and those nerve endings have complex function. They, as a man is either manipulating his own foreskin or having his foreskin manipulated, or thrusting inside of a woman or male partner. The foreskin folds in and out of itself and has a lot of stretch receptors, has a lot of fine gradient temperature receptors, has very, very fine touch nerve endings that aren't found anywhere else in the penis. And actually, the type of nerve endings, Meissner's corpuscles, which are found mostly or exclusively in the foreskin, in the ridge band, and in the frenulum and frenular delta, which are all parts of the foreskin, are by far the most sensitive parts of the penis. All of the four most sensitive parts, the other two are the outer and inner foreskin, are all parts of the penis that are removed from circumcision, and they're all the most sensitive parts. If you look at this Sorrells study, Sorrels, I believe, you can look at the graphic image of where the most sensitive parts of the penis are. It's all in the foreskin. And it has this complex movement that a circumcised man can never feel. His is just an inert sort of rod. It's just this unmoving thing that goes in and out. And so he's actually missing a lot. Of course, we know what the clitoris is and why that's a profound loss for a woman to lose her clitoris. But we don't understand that men are actually missing a lot, and they can't report on that. Just like females in female genital cutting culture say, I'm glad I don't have my clitoris. I think it's great. That would be disgusting. I don't want that part of my body, and don't know why anyone would. So you see the same thing with men in male genital cutting cultures. They say, why would I want my foreskin? It's gross. It's useless. They don't understand that it helps with actually also important functions of sex. It helps with lubrication. It helps with masturbation. It's very useful for foreplay. I would say actually has more diverse uses than the clitoris has. So actually, in some ways it has more uses. It has a higher majority of nerve endings. It has over 95% of the nerve endings, I believe. It's like 80 to 100,000 or something in that range, whereas the rest of the penis has about 4,000. The vagina, I believe, clitoris is like, 10,000 versus 1,000 in the rest of the vagina. But anyways, I think it's actually, if you look at the most recent numbers that haven't quite been released yet, but I assure you, there's actually a higher percentage of nerve endings in the foreskin than there are in the clitoris. So you're losing way, way more nerve endings because there are just way more nerve endings to start with in the penis. But you're also losing a higher percentage of your nerve endings than a woman would be losing. So it's really hard to compare the sexual effects, but both of them are clearly devastating if you think about it. I should add, with the male, you also have the head of the penis drying out and becoming calloused. It forms a thick, dry callus over it, whereas before it was an internal organ that has the foreskin gently massaging it during intercourse and protecting it during the rest of the day. It is now exposed constantly to clothing, rubbing against things, and it totally dries out. And because of this, it needs a lot more force to feel anything. Certainly can't feel all the fine, subtle excitement and joys of sex that you're supposed to feel, and the refined lovemaking experience that it is to be with an intact male is just not possible on that level. Men just can't feel that. If you're doing a lot of things and he's not looking, chances are he won't know what's going on. So it's a profound loss for men. It's a profound loss for females. I could talk about it all day. There's a lot of other aspects of it, but I'm just trying to hammer home for people in the U.S. who don't know these things about the male foreskin and the sexuality of it. Having your whole penis is better than having part of it for sexuality. Even if men can't really appreciate this loss or don't know about it, it is there in the same way that it's a loss for females, even if they're not upset about it, even if they think it's great and they're going to circumcise their daughters because that's how they've always done it and it's cleaner and whatever their arguments are. It's still harmful sexually, even if there isn't an awareness of that loss. As circumcised women, women circumcised as adults or men circumcised as adults can tell you. Again, it's just true. So that's the physical sexual effects. Another important part of this is the psychological impact. And this is actually a really interesting one, because it's so for women, as I said, I don't believe there's actually, and this isn't my specialty, someone else could probably speak a lot more to this, I don't believe there's a lot of awareness in female genital cutting cultures that female genital cutting is harmful. And so I think it's still at a point of being pretty repressed. I could be wrong about that. But as far as I know, for the most part, women are pretty happy with it in those cultures, and there's just not a big movement to end it yet within those cultures, even though here in the United States we think it's horrible, and it's obvious. The rest of the world also thinks that what we do is horrible, obviously. So I don't know about the psychological situation of women. I know that for the ones who do find out about it, they're horrified. I know that if you're circumcised as an older woman, or as in adolescence or childhood, just as if you're circumcised male at an older age, it's more likely to be traumatic in a way that you remember. And that's a little bit of a messy area to get into in childhood and infant trauma, because it's at a very deep level, and it has profound and pervasive effects, but it's hard to measure and hard to understand. But I would say for both sexes, I don't know why those would be any different. Any psychological damage caused by circumcision in childhood to either sex, I mean, it's cutting of the most sensitive part of your body in an extremely painful procedure, and it's forced upon you. So I don't know why that would be any different in psychological harm. But as an adult, actually a lot of men are finding out about this, and while I think for women it's still kind of underground in those cultures, a lot of men in the United States are increasingly becoming really, really, really traumatized by finding out what was done to them and what they're missing. And so on this level, I think there's actually significantly more damage to men at this point, because just more men know about it, more men are becoming really, really upset, are developing severe PTSD, depression. Men tend to get very isolated because of it, because they're told that, it was a good thing. Circumcision is great. Like, why would you complain about it? Like, why would you have any issue with it? And they're completely invalidated, completely isolated. and told, get over it, like, you're a man, you shouldn't be feeling those feelings, you shouldn't be a victim in general, you don't have rights to that, you're the one on top in society, you should be happy with your lot in life. And so in a lot of ways, men are continuously invalidated and don't have good support systems around this, and suffer in silence, and just read on the internet every day about how horrible it is, and just get more and more horrified and more upset about it. And so actually, for men, I would say it's really, really bad right now in terms of the psychological. There's also not very much help. I'm trying to fix that. But at the moment, there isn't a lot of psychological help for men around circumcision, and there's a really rapidly growing need for it because a lot of men are finding out about it and in a lot of pain around it. And hopefully things will change in female genital cutting cultures where they gain more awareness around it too, and we'll need to help them psychologically as well. Again, I just don't know enough about those cultures to speak more on the female side of it, but I can say that for the male side, the psychological trauma is actually pretty severe, and pretty horrible. And a lot of men also, aren't able to be in a relationship, aren't able to have sex, because they're in so much pain around it. It's just inconceivable that they even would consider being sexual anymore. They become estranged from their parents and sometimes even commit suicide. So some pretty bad stuff. So moving on, the human rights side of it, we say it's a violation of human rights to cut females' genitals. What about male? Why would that be any different? That one's just, I'm not even gonna go into that anymore. How is it any different if you're cutting male versus female genitals? There's this stigma in this culture that females are victims, that they're the ones who are hurt, that they're delicate, that males are disposable. But that's a really, really fucked up thing in itself. And is something that needs to change, and that's what the men's rights movement is largely about, is recognizing men aren't disposable, men have emotions, men are people too, and it's not okay to cut males' genitals any more than it is okay to cut a female's genitals. So in terms of human rights, it's identical. In a lot of these, it's pretty much identical with slightly different things across cultures, and across sexes, but in a lot of ways they're actually pretty much the same. They had the same intention, they're damaging in the same ways, they're given the same excuses, they don't really have any medical benefits, they have similar histories. Another thing I'll say quickly is both of them are justified with religious reasons, saying, well, it's my child, it's my choice, and my religion tells me to do it, and so I'm going to do it, and I don't care about any of these other aspects of it. I'm not even going to think about them, because for me it's just what my religion tells me I have to do, or my culture tells me I have to do, my tribe tells me I have to do, whether that's your United States tribe or your African tribe or whatever. So another thing that's actually another really interesting one is prevalence. So male genital cutting is much more prevalent. I forget the numbers, but it's far more prevalent, and so in that way, well, in many ways they're pretty close. One thing I didn't say earlier, the foreskin basically is a male's clitoris. It's got the exact same kind of nerve endings. They're in a super high concentration, and that part of your body is just there for your pleasure. That's the main function, and to make sex easier. But it's really you're just cutting away pleasure by cutting that away. That's what kind of is the main thing that happens. So they're pretty comparable, I would say. But in terms of how prevalent they are, male circumcision is actually a lot more prevalent, and so in that way it's also actually worse because there's a lot more of it that happens. Again, a lot of cultures see males as more disposable. It's okay to hurt them. They're not really human in the same way that females are. Something that Warren Farrell, who's a male, writes, well, I don't know if I'd call him specifically male rights. He also is very for, knows a lot about feminism as well, but, yes, women have been treated as property throughout the ages. Men, however, have actually been treated as less than property, and as completely disposable, as not having any value unless they can prove themselves in some way and have some value, have some utility to society. So yeah, that's actually about it. I think I'm almost done covering this issue. One more thing is I've been using the words, it's been hard, male circumcision and female genital mutilation, because those are the words we use for them, right? So I would argue that they're actually identical, whether we call it male or female circumcision or male or female genital mutilation. There's no reason to use different terms for them. A lot of people try to use male or female genital cutting to just emphasize the most literal interpretation of it possible, without giving any interpretation of if it's mutilation or any euphemism such as circumcision. The World Health Organization says, all forms of female genital cutting, even if it leaves no permanent effects, is genital mutilation, whereas no form of male circumcision is genital mutilation. Which, it's interesting. I also heard the leader of the World Health Organization was asked by Ronald Goldman what are the functions of the foreskin. So if you are the leading world expert on this, what's the function of the foreskin? And he didn't know. He said, well, I don't know what the functions are, which I think is revealing of the ignorance around this issue, and why we say female genital mutilation and male circumcision, because there still is a universal, almost cultural misunderstanding of what male genital cutting actually is, and how in every way it is identical or worse than female genital mutilation, would be my argument. And so it was a very roundabout way of getting there, but that's my opinion. Just my guess. It took me a lot of years to get here. Only in the last year or two, after having followed this issue for the past 6 or 7, and obsessively studying it the whole time, have I realized that there's no reason that I should really think female genital mutilation is that much worse than male genital mutilation. They both are genital mutilation. If you look at the actual facts of what is lost, in some ways male is actually losing more. In some ways they're kind of comparable. It's really hard to measure, and I don't know how you would measure it. I don't know. I don't really have a definitive answer. I think they're pretty comparably awful. Again, I've started to lean towards maybe male circumcision is actually a little bit worse. It's certainly more prevalent, and that makes it worse. And Also psychologically, I think it's worse for some reasons for a lot of men than it has been for women. Although that may change, but I think we do need to switch to using more, at least neutral language, and saying male genital cutting and trying to bring that more in, and comparing that with female genital cutting. I also want to say Brendan Murata. One of the reasons I haven't covered this topic till now is because I'm not an expert on it, but also because Brendan Murata in his film American Circumcision goes pretty deep into these issues and talks with both women who have been mutilated or circumcised and men is the main topic of the film. So he goes pretty deep into it, and Eric Klopper's play Sex and Circumcision, which is coming out soon, also goes pretty deep into these issues. So I would also like to defer to them and just say, they have some very valuable things, and I hope that they can really lift up this discussion more and start to bring it more to the forefront of starting to really compare these two and understand that actually they're pretty much identical. They're pretty much the same thing. Cutting off part of your baby's genitals is wrong regardless if it's a boy or a girl. It's going to be psychologically damaging when he finds out what was done to him, especially as this culture is shifting to a point where we're going to see all circumcision as mutilation for the most part. I believe everyone younger than me, at least, is going to pretty much universally see it that way. And so it's my strong hope and desire that we can continue bringing this conversation forward. I know this was a long video today, guys. I really wanted to cover the entirety of this topic in details, and all its details, and yeah, let me know what you think. Love to hear your feedback. And thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.